Hi, Bill. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Both of our cameras are working, and we're kicking off here. We're starting off our blog week in review with a look at a rather heated exchange on SCHIP expansion / reauthorization. And I thought I'd let you kind of set the table on the blog hook on this and how it's developed into a pretty big crossover controversy between conservative and progressive blogs here.
Well, basically what happened is about a week and a half ago, Democrats had a 12-year-old Graham Frost give the weekly radio address response to George Bush's weekly radio address. George Bush was talking about why he was vetoing an expansion of the state children's health insurance program, and Graham Frost was part of a family of 6 that was already part of the program. He and his younger sister were in a very severe car accident, and so he shared that experience, talked about how important it was for his family to have that health insurance, and the Democrats found it to be a very compelling story to present to the public. A number of conservative bloggers, I think beginning with a poster at freerepublic.com.
Yeah, it started at Free Republic.
Which is not a blog, but a sort of more of a chat room that's been around pre-blog since the 90s.
The mirror image to the Democratic underground.
Yes. And they started putting out speculation that this family's financial situation was very healthy, that they didn't deserve to be in this program. This was evidence that SCHIP had spiraled out of control, and it was becoming a middle-class or upper-middle-class entitlement. Some people even put the family's address online. People started calling their house and asking about their personal financial information. And Michelle Malkin, who was my former editor in college, she became sort of a repository of collecting...
That's a good trivia question for later.
I'm sorry?
That's a good trivia question for later.
Exactly. Both Michelle, me, and David Reese of Get Your War On, all Oberlin College graduates. She became sort of a repository for all of the conservative blog activity that was going on. She even did her own poking around at the family's house and the family's workplace, and she blogged about that.
Well, can we start right there, because I've been following it pretty closely on both ends. I actually do not visit Free Republic that often. I don't visit Democratic Underground either. But I do read Malkin every day. And, I think we should, accurately describe kind of what she's done. I can say she has not posted any of their personal information.
No, she did not.
On her blog.
She did not herself.
And as far as what the reporting that she did do, she did go to their commercial property and talk to some of their tenants. And she also drove by their house and reported on, just firsthand observations of what it looked like. But she did not post any pictures of the house or anything else like that.
No. And this, we talked about this at our last show. To what extent does one blogger's actions reflect on another? And it can get a little murky. So on one hand, it's not fair to pin on Michelle. Some other person posts the family's address and phone number.
Do you know who did?
I don't know offhand who did. I'm sure we can probably dig that up and put it in the links later, I'm sure. But at the same time, I do think Michelle Malkin's sort of stock and trade is to kind of lead these sort of mini movements and to put pressure on people. And I would even argue intimidate and harass them. And so it's a fine line. But she's not out there slapping people down that do that stuff. And she's certainly encouraging other people to put on this sort of pressure. So it's a fine line.
Well, in what way is she encouraging people to pressure the Frosts in particular? I mean, I would say that she definitely wanted to develop the story as far as finding out, as an example, what these persons, the Frost asset were, etc. what their story was and create, a record for that so that people could debate, is this a middle-class program? Is this not a middle-class program? Is this the type of insurance we want to be giving to other people? That seems to me legitimate. I mean, I would definitely agree with you, if she's going to then go out and pressure the family and harass them, that would strike me definitely as wrong. But what that she has done has been pressure on them.
There's a big difference between objective journalistic scrutiny and the spreading of wild speculation combined with personal attacks. And journalists would certainly call a family. I mean, it's a public program. It's taxpayer money. People have a right to know where their money goes and how it's being used. And this family chose to enter the public spotlight. So yes, objective scrutiny is appropriate, but the spreading of wild and baseless speculation, combined with people calling them at home and asking them personal questions, not in the interest of objective analysis, but in the interest of intimidation, that's where it gets much more troubling and disturbing to a lot of folks. And when you're running point, Michelle sort of ran point on this, and you see some people behind you doing that kind of thing, I do think it is somewhat incumbent upon you to admonish those. If they're working on your team in that sort of activity, it's important to say, hey, don't do this. This is not appropriate. And I don't think she draws those lines very well. And it gives an overall sense that there is an online lynch mob that is engaging not so much in objective scrutiny, but in overall intimidation and harassment, with the objective being, if you want to share your personal story, you're going to pay a price for that. Regardless of what the facts are, we don't really care. We're going to put out whatever speculation is helpful to us and make your life miserable for engaging in the democratic process.
Like I said, I read Malkin every day. She's on my list of blogs that I cover. And I can definitely confirm that she, did not admonish any conservative blogs for going after this family, for calling this family, etc. But on the other hand, she also didn't in any way encourage people to do that. Instead, what she did do is try to investigate the matter and create information. I guess my question would be, what that she did is all that different from what the New York Times and Baltimore Sun did, who also investigated the matter, called the family, got information, investigated their commercial property, etc.
Well, the biggest difference is that the general conservative blog approach to these things is to sort of shoot first and get factual information later, if even. The first move was to post wild speculation about what their house costs, what their private school tuition cost, what their work situation was. They throw that up there initially without doing any inquiry. And then they go out and do nominal poking around, but not really rigorous journalistic activity. So it's very easily interpreted by the family as being an intimidation tactic. And you never get, in the end, an actual objective basis of the situation. Even after the New York Times and the Baltimore Sun, USA Today ran factual pieces that gave us the full picture of their situation, you still see conservative bloggers putting out bad information about what they're saying. So there's no actual journalism going on here, and that's why in the big scheme of things, it feels like intimidation and harassment. I think it got liberal bloggers very upset. I think it played extremely badly in the mainstream media for conservatives. I think it backfired immensely, and I don't think it makes them look good in general. I don't think it's helped them try to defeat this bill, because it's kept the issue alive and above the fold probably much longer than it might have had otherwise.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the New York Times and Baltimore Sun would have done their investigation and produced the objective journalism information that they did if conservative bloggers hadn't been asking the questions about how well off or how destitute this family really was?
It's certainly, if the conservative blogs were silent on the subject, there would have been no follow-up. And that's generally that's been the great success of conservative talk radio and conservative blogs. They tend to generate a lot of noise about something, that pressures the mainstream media into doing additional inquiry, or in some cases just when they're sloppy, just repeating conservative messages. So that's often been a success for them. In this case, in particular, they picked a really bad choice of target, because when the objective inquiry did happen, they were proven to be way off base of what this family is going through and what they're dealing with. So if they want to pat themselves on the back and say, hey, at least we had some journalistic coverage about it, we did our job, I don't think that's what they're saying to themselves right now.
Well, I would agree with you that they definitely came off looking bad. There's no doubt about that. When you have the Baltimore Sun and USA Today saying, you're beating up a 12-year-old kid, you don't look good. But on the other hand, the information that ultimately came because of their focus on the issue, the fact that the family owns a $160,000 commercial property and has rents from it, I thought that did kind of, add to the substantive nature of the debate. To have that conversation of, okay, how messed up is our healthcare in our country that, a family with these assets, does have to depend on the government, and what should our government's role be in combating that problem?
I would agree with that, and I think just from my liberal perspective, the additional details about their economic situation helped make the argument that what we consider to be middle class in this country is not a very secure place to be right now. This family makes about $45,000 a year. They have a commercial property that gives them some rental income, but they have 4 kids, and they still can't afford health insurance. As the report showed, they tried to get private insurance from 3 different companies. They weren't accepted for pre-existing conditions. And I think there are a lot of Americans that are empathetic and sympathetic to that situation. So while conservatives thought they were going to make this great case about how this program was spiraling out of control and was helping freewheeling yuppies get health care, instead you've shown a brighter light on the plight of working class America.
Yeah, it definitely didn't play well, and the netroots have actually done kind of a new campaign to help further along the Dems on the issue. Something that I found kind of more interesting than the back and forth between Malcolm and the progressive blogs was what Firedog Lake and Open Left were doing in order to concentrate on Democrats on the issue. There were 5 Democrats that voted against the bill the first time around and said they would not override a veto. And they developed a campaign through Blue America and their blog pack to pressure the 5 to change their vote. And yesterday they scored a victory. Barron Hill, Democrat from Indiana, announced he would switch his vote and would vote to override Bush's veto. So I thought it was interesting that kind of the netroots were kind of taking on the role of almost a majority whip for the Democratic Party on this SCHIP issue.
Well, this is part of a larger campaign that was really launched by Open Left, which is run by Matt Stoller and Chris Bowers and Mike Lux, and Firedog Lake has been a big part of it as well, to go after who they call the Bush dogs. They're often known as blue dogs. The phrase blue dog came about, I believe, in the 90s to describe a group of conservative-leaning Democrats. And this is an evidence that what's happening in the liberal blogosphere now, at least in these corners, is not so much about winning for winning's sake, having Democrats in charge, whoever they are. There are actual policies that they would like to see implemented, and they don't think it's helpful to the overall Democratic Party to have a handful of people undercutting the party at key moments. And so now you have a handful of Democrats who did not support expanding the children's health insurance program. The Bush dog campaign is focusing on that as their current task at hand and having some effect. I think the key for that to be as successful as possible is if it's just seen as a handful of blogs trying to extract demands from a handful of people, that's probably not going to work as well long term. If they are successful at elevating these votes into the spotlight to the point where their own constituents are aggrieved by what they're doing, and they see that there's pressure in their own districts to act differently and to be a stronger voice for the party. That's going to have the most impact. And so we see it had a little bit of effect with Barron Hill this week. We'll see if it continues on before the vote on Thursday.
Yeah, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is reporting that one of the other Bush dogs targeted here, Jim Marshall out of Georgia, already has two people who are going to be challenging him in a Democratic primary.
Well, there's a local blog there in Georgia called Tandy's Tavern, which has been merciless on Marshall and has really gone the extra mile to draw attention to this vote. Marshall appears to be a Democrat who is in somewhat of a conservative district.
It's a conservative district.
And so he thinks, I have to pick certain spots to prove that I'm not like a Washington Democrat. And what the bloggers at Tandy's Tavern are trying to show is, you are, and also there's another blog, Atypical Joe, which has also made this point, that you're misreading your own district here. You've made this false assumption that just because you have conservatives in your district that they're not going to get behind children's health insurance. And Marshall seems to have sort of dug in his heels on the subject, but the fact that he's drawing primary opponents in the context of this, it might make him second guess what his calculation was. And that might not have happened if blogs weren't involved in calling attention to these things. These things might have gone along much quieter, and you wouldn't necessarily hear that kind of feedback from your district.
Yeah, I think another important part about the Bush Dog campaign is that it's not always about having primaries for all the Bush Dogs. I think they've identified like 40 of them. They're not going to have primaries for all of them. I think a big component of it is trying to get them, like you said, to listen to their constituents better and refocus them on what issues are really important to their base and which ones people will respond to. I remember when Stoller first came out with this Bush Dog campaign, I had a number of papers here in Washington call me and ask, what was going on, what was the point of this? And I think the big point that needs to be driven home is that their goal isn't necessarily replacing all these people. It's applying pressure to move them to the left on certain key issues, and SCHIP is definitely one of those issues.
And there's an article in the New York Times on Friday about how you're seeing Washington Democrats complaining that the liberal base is making life difficult for them. And they're looking at this in very much in kind of a very binary way. There are these people in the base that are giving me a hard time and not letting me do the politically savvy centrist thing, and they're going to make it harder for us to win in 2008. And I think a number of folks in the blogosphere aren't looking at it that way. Sometimes you might hear it say we're trying to pull people to the left, but I think for the most part we're trying to give you the political mandate, the political backing. We're trying to whip up the public to let you know that what we want is actually the politically smart thing to do. And at the minimum, when it works that way, I think it's going to have the biggest success. The more it's perceived as trying to pull the party in a preferred direction away from the center, that's probably not going to work as well.
Well, yeah, I think we get bogged down in directions sometimes, but I think maybe a better way to frame it is pointing out which issues really matter to their constituents and which way they should be voting on them. I mean, another issue before Congress right now is FISA. The ACLU is very worried about possible concessions that Democrats will make, specifically granting amnesty to telecom companies who cooperated with the Bush administration after 9/11 on surveillance of foreign communications by Americans, and also that the legislation will allow the FISA court to grant umbrella warrants, in other words, not going case by case, but just signing off the entire system. And the ACLU is very worried about that. And you have pretty much the same crowd. Christy Hard Smith at Fire Dog Lake, Matt Stoller at Open Left, and Glenn Greenwald too, who are very concerned about this cave-in. And Glenn wrote at the very end of his post about his worries about the new FISA bill. He said, this is definitely an issue. This is an issue where I definitely see the value of bringing up primaries to Democrats who vote for this compromise.
Well, there was a particularly interesting story in TPM Muckraker by Spencer Ackerman about how the ACLU had caught wind of a draft bill that, if memory serves correctly, was going to have this telecom immunity into it, and even though they hadn't seen
Protect America Act extension or something. PAA?
I'm sorry,
the Protect America Act PAA.
Right. And even though they had not been able to get an actual hard copy of this bill, it was all they were hearing things through the grapevine in Washington. They shared that rumor with certain blogs, knowing that would get their attention and be able to direct grassroots energy towards key senators and congresspeople to say, hey, don't have a bill with that provision in it or not. And that was a very astute move by the ACLU, and I think it shows that Washington organizations are learning how they can partner with blogs to have an impact in the halls of Congress, before the damage is done. So often we don't even hear about key issues until the bill gets passed. And then only then does the mainstream media report on the details, and you get upset about it, and it's too late to do anything about it. You need those folks in Washington who are in the trenches to share information online quickly and spread the information quickly across the country if you're going to get people involved. And so you don't have a handful of special interests helping to shape legislation in Washington. You're having a broader group of grassroots people involved. So that seems to be working here to some degree. However, Democrats seem very, very gun-shy of being perceived as weak on national security. They haven't come up with a different way to frame these issues. So that's why there was great frustration at capitulation on the Democrats on FISA back in August. Now people are even more engaged and involved, and we'll see if that makes a difference.
Speaking of Dems and national security, I was hoping we could switch gears to White House 08 for a second here. Barack Obama on Wednesday 10/10, or was it Thursday, came out with an op-ed in the New Hampshire union leader that actually coincided with an online ad campaign, touting his leadership of fighting the Bush's march to war with Iran, and he was, specifically picking on Hillary Clinton's vote for the Lieberman-Kyle amendment. It was pointed out that he had made pretty much some very similar points in a 2006 speech. The Planck's Noam Schreiber got emails on it, and some generally supportive Hillary Clinton voters. They don't agree with, not Hillary Clinton voters, Hillary Clinton bloggers. Not that they agree with her on every issue, and not even on this one. Kind of jumped on Obama for castigating Hillary on this vote when Obama missed it. Taylor Marsh and Talk Left's Geraldine Merritt and Garance at Taft, all kind of pointed out that it might be a little specious for Obama to be saying he's leading this movement against the march to war in Iran when he didn't even show up for the vote on the Lieberman-Kyle amendment. Have you seen that online ad campaign, and what do you think about this using of the Lieberman-Kyle amendment by Obama to create a divide between him and Hillary?
Well, Obama and Edwards have started to realize that if they're going to have any chance of getting this nomination, they have to draw favorable contrasts between themselves and Clinton, or else she's going to be the default candidate who runs away with the whole thing. I think what Obama might have found, and getting some of that blog reaction, is he hasn't built up enough goodwill and enough trust in the blogosphere to be able to make that argument and have everyone rally around him right away, even though he's articulating a position that they generally agree with.
Yeah, I think that was something surprising about Taylor Marsh and Geraldine Merritt. They were both saying, look, we don't agree with Hillary's vote on the Lieberman-Kyle amendment, But at least Obama could show up to the vote if he's going to say he's really leading this fight.
Now, I happen to not. I wouldn't give Obama a hard time about that myself. You're campaigning, you can't catch every vote.
However, all the other White House aiders voted on it.
Everyone's got different schedules.
That's true.
And I assume that these guys have staffers in Washington to say, hey, this is going to be really tight, you better be in town for this one. This one really wasn't all that tight, so I can understand why I'd say I don't have to physically be there for this particular vote. If he had, I think, deeper support at this point, he might get a pass on not being physically present by those same bloggers or other bloggers.
Well, I think Garant's pointed out that this isn't the first controversial vote that everyone else voted on that he skipped. There was also the move on vote that he skipped.
Well, he skipped that vote for a specific reason. He was physically present in Washington, D.C., and he chose to make a personal protest by...
He was also actually getting out of town there, too. It was because he voted on a substitute amendment by Barbara Boxer that condemned everybody, and then 2 hours later he was already on a plane, and then the other vote came, and he said he left early because of it.
Right. So that's somewhat of a different situation, I think. This comes back to what I've talked about in past blogging heads. When Obama and Edwards chose to agree with Clinton on refusing to pledge to get all troops out of Iraq by 2013, they chose not to take advantage of a very simple way to draw a contrast between them. Now it seems like they share the basic foreign policy approach. And without engendering support by saying, I'm clearly going to get us out of Iraq and she is not, going after her on some of these other issues, it's not as easy a sell. So they can't assume just because they know the blogosphere is very concerned about Iran, just because you nominally agree with that, people aren't going to immediately rush to you and amplify your message. They might find something to nitpick about, like you're not physically there for the vote. There needs to be a number of things happening to build a sense of trust, build a sense of leadership. And maybe it's a lesson for the Obama campaign that they're going to got to put more on the table to get people really excited at this point.
They're running out of time to learn lessons, though.
That is extremely true.
Another Hillary item. I don't know if you saw the Washington Post's interview with Hillary earlier this week, where she basically said that we really don't know what the administration is doing as far as care for prisoners, detaining prisoners, and she said she definitely didn't agree with the current policy, but a lot of bloggers still saw that quote and took it as Hillary Clinton being vague about what she would do as far as torture goes. Mark Kleiman and Matthew Iglesias and Andrew Sullivan all came out and said, Hillary is being big on this. We need to pin her down on this. And then Peter Dow was quick, getting the message out to the bloggers that the full Washington Post didn't actually post full transcript of what Hillary said, and that Hillary, did later in that same quote come out saying that there's a very bright line that we need to follow the Geneva Conventions. And Sullivan at first said, that explanation didn't really carry water with him, that he just flat out didn't trust her. But then the next day, after he said he slept on it, he decided that, Hillary does have a good history on this. She has, an earlier 2006 speech showing she's anti-torture. I was wondering if you followed that debate at all, and what's your feeling on Hillary and prisoner care?
Well, somewhat similar to with Obama, there isn't a deep love in the blogosphere in general for a single candidate. Period. There are areas of mistrust, I think, that all bloggers,
and probably least of all Hillary.
Probably least of all Hillary, but there isn't at the same time deep antipathy to the point that everyone's rallying around saying we got to find the anti-Hillary. There's just a general fracturing going on, and so even though she has said nominally I'm against torture, she even took a fairly decent and strong stand on that in the last televised debate that they had. Just a little thing, by not saying clearly that what Bush is doing is torture, the way that Jimmy Carter said very definitively around the same time, that makes some bloggers, that raises an eyebrow.
Yes, sets off alarms.
And I think Matt Stoller made the point that Bush's whole argument is I'm not calling it torture. So you can say you're against torture and not really mean it if you're not defining the word appropriately. And Hillary Clinton has an issue in general, I think, with trying to give herself as much wiggle room as possible so she can maneuver once in office, and is purposely not. She's purposely not trying to make a lot of definitive stands. She's purposely not trying to seem overly partisan when it comes to Republicans and George Bush. She wants to show that she's not a polarizing person. So, in doing that, she is going to, not get a lot of love from bloggers that watch these issues very closely. That's arguably less of an issue for her because she's at 53% nationally without having a lot of blog support at all. That's not where her base of support is coming from. Whereas another candidate that's trying to make a leap needs to be able to show that there's some energy behind them, and blogs could theoretically help with that. So I think she's going to shrug it off and not really care. But I think that it presents a window into what's going on, I think, in the liberal blogosphere in general when it comes to the race.
Did you catch the GOP debate at all on Tuesday night?
Oh, I would have missed the entertainment.
Well, actually, no, it wasn't even Tuesday night, right? It was Tuesday afternoon.
They reran on NBC.
Oh well, I watched it at 4 o'clock, but I just thought it was so strange to have a debate in mid afternoon or 4 o'clock kickoff time. Seemed odd to me. What were your thoughts on the debate? Have you looked into any of the conservative reaction to it?
Well, the conservative blogosphere seems very fractured as well. They're not really rallying behind anybody. There seem to be certain conservative bloggers that have picked their horse and are spinning hard for their individual, and I'm thinking particularly those who are really Washington-based. But on the whole, I think there is sort of a malaise going on there. There's no one that's really picked up the conservative torch. And people, I think, had a lot of high hopes for Fred Thompson coming in. He didn't perform up to expectations. I'm echoing, I think, Eugene Robinson's column and thinking that his whole argument for being in the race was style, not substance. It was not that his positions were so extra special.
It's true. I'm going to agree with you that Thompson definitely didn't perform as Ronald Reagan did. However, I really don't look to Eugene Robinson for my analysis of the GOP base. The analogy I used in the blogometer was that Fred Thompson was the Roger Clemens of the GOP field, at least for 2007. The Yankees were down about 5.5 games out behind, more than that, behind the Red Sox, and they knew they needed a Southern familiar face to come in and save them. And he came in, and he pitched okay. I think Clemens went something like 8-8 with a 4.18 ERA. So he was competitive, but he was by no means the savior. And then, of course, he got shelled in the only playoff game he pitched in against the Indians. So I ended my Clemens-Thompson comparison by saying, we'll see if Thompson will have a happier ending. But,
and Thompson really needed to. Because his argument is I'm a Ronald Reagan-esque communicator. I'm at that level. To not perform at that level right off the bat and command the room, I can only presume, had to be deflating to a lot of conservative bloggers and conservative voters in general.
I don't know if you paid attention to the rollout of his campaign, but they took so long to do it. They had so many staff shakeups beforehand. They had Mark Carroll leave. They had all kinds of high-level staffers leave. As far as personal appearances go, when he spoke at the Michigan GOP retreat in Mackinac Island, he bombed. So actually, for conservatives that followed the race closely, which definitely is conservative bloggers, expectations for Thompson going into that debate Tuesday were actually pretty low.
And Thompson tried to play off of that. He talked about how he was rusty and all that sort of thing, but he can't play that expectations game anymore. It's still his main basis for being in the race is his communication skills, and all those hiccups that you talked about earlier, they could have all been washed away if he really knocked that debate out of the park, and he didn't. And so I don't see where he goes from here. He seems to be more like the Wes Clark, who fizzled out very quickly in the Democratic race in 2004. And I don't know where conservative bloggers go from here, because every front runner, every top-tier candidate has a weakness in the eyes of the conservative blogosphere and the conservative voters in general. And they seem very reluctant to rally around a second-tier candidate like a Huckabee or a Brownback or a Tancredo or Hunter or what have you.
Well, it's very funny you make that Wesley Clark comparison, because, 6 months ago when Thompson's name was first floated, my former boss, Chuck Todd, that was the very first thing he said is, oh, no, he's just another Wes Clark. And I actually at the time thought, no, unlike Wes Clark, Thompson's, actually won a Senate race. He's a veteran to the game. He knows what's going on. He'll do stronger. But I'd have to say I've been proven wrong. He's just not been nearly as professional, prepared as I thought he would be.
Do you have a sense of where the conservative blogosphere goes from here?
Well, you know what? I don't. They definitely still are unhappy. After the debate, there was a long discussion at the corner. There were some people, Mark Levin got it started, that they were kind of upset that Rudy Giuliani was calling himself a conservative. Their argument was that basically, I don't care what George Will says, this guy's just not a conservative. He doesn't really have a record, anything beyond kind of a law and order guy. And then another contributor at the corner named David Freddoso came on and said, yeah, I definitely agree. If I was to kind of define what the trinity of conservative issues were, I'd say there were guns, babies, and taxes. And Giuliani fails on two of those. And then Red State's Eric Erickson, who's based out of Georgia, chimed in and said, down here in Georgia, over in Louisiana, up over to Kansas, and in the rest of the country, David is absolutely right. The Republican base, which consists of conservative voters, looks at babies, guns, and taxes. And in Washington, D.C., if you look at the major right-of-center interest groups, they boil down to guns, babies, and taxes. So, you have Giuliani failing on two of those three trinities, and he's just not, there's just not anyone else that is exciting the GOP bloggers right now.
Why don't they get behind a Huckabee or a Brownback?
Okay, well, we can start with Huckabee. Huckabee has a bad record on spending in their eyes. He raised too many taxes when he was in Arkansas, and I think as folksy as they like his, generally perform strong in the debate. They feel he's funny, but I also think they deeply want to win, and they don't think Huckabee can. And he's also just falling, very, very short fundraising wise. And they're smart like Marcos. They're not going to pick someone who's going to be completely unable to raise any money. And it's pretty much the same deal with Brownback, although Brownback also supported the amnesty that John McCain did. So that's a non-starter right there.
Okay. I'm mildly distracted by my cat, by the way.
Oh, well, I wouldn't want the GOP field to distract from your cat.
I know you're a huge cat lover, Conn.
I'm deathly allergic.
But she's making a star turn in our show today.
I will say this, that from what I've looked at of the GOP field reaction in the liberal blogs, they've been pretty open about the fact that the only person they really are scared of is Giuliani. Chris Bowers has mentioned this a number of times. It's the only person that the left is Google bombing right now.
I wouldn't say that's a blanket opinion.
Okay, make the case.
Obviously, that's Chris Bowers' opinion. Maybe others share it.
Who would you say you are most scared of in the GOP field?
I find this Republican field to be the weirdest and creepiest and craziest that I've ever seen. There's no one guy there that comes across as chummy. There's no one there you can have a beer with. There's no one there that's, I think, a particularly compelling communicator to the extent that Romney is. I think he's debilitated by his flip-flops.
I always hate to say it, but the more and more I talk to conservatives that I know, especially down south, I know it's impolite, but it seems like the Mormon issue is a non-starter for a lot of people.
Well, I mean, it remains to be seen if he can overcome that. I mean, it's ridiculous to have to overcome one's faith, but John Kennedy did. You know, there was definitely concerns about a Catholic in the White House, and he gave an amazing speech that put that to rest for enough people to be able to win. You know, Romney would probably have to do something like that. So I treat that as an open question whether he's able to do that or not. It hasn't been fully tested yet.
That's true. I just keep looking at South Carolina and the fact that Romney has moved significantly in Iowa and New Hampshire when he pours in advertising money to there. And he belatedly started putting money in South Carolina. But the movement just isn't there yet. And that's kind of the barometer I look at as to whether or not Romney's going to be able to overcome it. Whether or not, because there aren't... The evangelical section of the GOP is, out of those two states, is most strong in South Carolina. And I'm just not seeing Romney gain traction.
Well, that's a primary consideration. I think the question whether if he was the nominee.
Oh, you're right. We were asking who are you most afraid of. So
right. I mean, he has maybe the best communication skills of anybody on that stage. But I just think the 30-second ads you could run against him, with him showing the same amount of sincerity and conviction, saying the absolute opposite thing, you could run those ads all day long. And Giuliani has fair communication skills, but there's just a lot of weird tics in his personality. He comes across as very, very authoritarian, and he's promoting sort of a Bush squared foreign policy, which I don't think is going to fly. And McCain in a very similar boat. I mean, and sort of what's fundamentally, I think, weakens them is that they're embracing a war that most of the country opposes.
So wrapping this up here, I got to get an answer out of you. It's got to be one of them. Who are you most afraid of?
I would probably be most afraid of Huckabee.
Huckabee, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Fair enough.
But I agree with you that I think his record on taxes and immigration will probably make him if he got into the top tier, I bet the corporate Republicans would come down like a ton of bricks.
Well, Club for Growth already whacks him every chance they get.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll end it there, Bill.
Excellent. Well, it's been great talking to you again.
Talk to you in 2 weeks.
Excellent.
Okay.